So the ring has been banned, Amped Raptor has been banned, Giganta banned, that one's not very relevant. But 4 cards got unbanned. And I actually already own a playset of all 4 of the banned cards, which is convenient. So then I had to decide, what's this new format going to look like? Because the Mox Opal unban is kind of crazy. And certainly the other 3 cards are, I think, good enough to see play. What's the new format going to look like? And I landed on what I think are probably like the 4 best choices. At least I think there's 5 really good choices. Maybe 6, but I didn't have the cards for 2 of them. So I didn't own the cards for, I don't own Underworld Breaches, so I couldn't, and the Grinding Station stuff, so I couldn't build that deck. But I think that deck's got a lot of potential. And then the other deck, I don't own Blade of the Blood Chief, and there might be some other things, but I'm basically a little bit short on Basking Brood Scale combo, and I think that deck actually probably gets worse with the twin unban because it was kind of sneaking under the radar of not enough instant speed spot removal in the format, which might not be the case anymore. All right, so then I'll go over what I think the 4 good choices are. There's Primeval Titan or Amulet combo. I chose not to go with Amulet combo because I haven't got good enough at sideboarding yet, and mostly sideboarding, and I haven't gotten as good with the Amulet or the Aftermath Analyst lines, and so I'm just gonna shelve this one for now, play it at a later point in time. And it might be better to go back off of Aftermath Analyst. There might be more graveyard hate, and you might be leaned more into a bad deck, and maybe your deck can be more efficient and strong without playing the explosive graveyard shenanigans. But the graveyard loop stuff almost seems better than Titan itself, just being able to like scape shift, hit a bunch of mana, and then Aftermath Analyst, and then Analyst brings back Shifting Woodland and just loop for infinite mana there on the spot. Or you do that with Lumra, and then you're milling your whole deck as you go, and then eventually, like Valakut Death, or maybe even like random Desert Barbarian Ring, some other ping trigger to win the game. The potential of that deck seems really scary, and so I'm kind of excited to see where the Amulet heads take the deck in the future. The next deck I'd like to talk about is Creativity. This guy got a lot easier to persist with Faceless Looting, and I played and built this deck first out of the newer decks and worked around with it a lot, and I think the deck is good, but upon building and playing some of the other decks, I felt like sometimes it just kind of trips over itself. You can have hands that are a lot of clunky pieces. You're kind of 2 different decks at the same time, a Reanimator deck and a Polymorph deck, and sometimes it can just be horrifically awkward, where you used to be a control deck that's just trying to draw 4 creativity, and the struggle there was like surviving and like just things going smoothly. And now you can have games where it's like I drew like a billion persist and a billion creativity, and I'm not interacting. And anyway, I decided against playing this deck. And I'm pretty stocked to what most the League 5.0 lists have been doing, except for I'm playing a 5th threat, partly so if they surgical extract my Arcana Cruelty, I still have another threat I can pull in the deck, but also just to up the consistency of the persist play. And in my testing, it's been decent, not amazing, but I have persisted a Broodmate Dragon on turn 2, and then been able to race someone to death with 7 points of flying power on turn 2. And I do think this card is good. Yeah, I wouldn't play more than one of it because you really want your creativities to hit Archons. And if you haven't seen either card, your Archon hit rate's still 80%, which is pretty good. But it does give you just one extra big body that you can randomly persist into just to up that persist consistency. Because only playing 4 copies of a card and then hoping you're going to reanimate it quickly, even with Faceless Lootings, like, it's a bit of a dream. And so I have had a couple different occasions where just having that extra body helps you get an early persist play and put a big dragon on the table. So I think this card is good. And I've liked where I've taken the deck. I'm probably going to keep playing, working on the deck. I feel like the removal suite still takes some fine tuning. You know, do you play more than the 4 Thoughtseize? The other thing I'm playing one copy of, and this I'm a little less sure about, is I'm playing a Molten Collapse. And this is cool because it can destroy Amulet. It can destroy Mox Opal and hit a creature at the same time, which, you know, can be cool. Because the descent's really easy. You're a 12 fetch land deck. And I haven't seen like Hammer Time, but, you know, it can kill 2 things there. It just seems like it's got a lot of play and people aren't playing it. And maybe it's more of a sideboard card, but then, like, to burn a whole sideboard slot. I like most of my sideboard answers to be instant speed, because usually it seems like that's what you need. I don't know. I've been liking this card, but it's also a sorcery. And Push and Bolt are also good and efficient and fast. And this is basically in one of my push slots. I've been playing one of these, trying it out. All right, and for the next deck I'm going to talk about. The next deck I want to talk about is Energy, specifically the Boros variant, because Boros is what I've been playing and winning a lot of games with when the ring was still legal. And I was kind of late on the train of playing more rings. For a long time I was only playing 1 ring, and I was playing more Fables, like, still in the main deck, because I thought Fable had some really cool applications with things like the sideboard Obsidian Charmaw, or like the Ajanis and stuff. Anyway, I ended up, towards the end, it was like, all right, cut the Fable, play the ring. Ring's like too good. It really was. It was pretty nuts in that deck. But anyway, they banned Ring and they banned Abtractor, but Energy Package still seems really solid. Like, I will play these cards. And Pressure plus Blood Moon plus super good efficient removal. And, like, this weird go wide thing that other decks, as much as people are able to kill 1 toughness creatures, there's something weird about having, like, tons of 1 toughness creatures. The deck actually turns into, like, a surprising menace. And I think this deck's still really good. It's fast. It's faster than you think. It surprises you how much math you can get when you, like, randomly just, oh, and on my end step, I'll kill my own, you know, you try and kill my Johnny, and then it's like, I kill my token in response. Now I have a Planeswalker. Goes into my turn, make a cat, gain life, make more cats, play bombardment, hit your end step, and you make like 6 more tokens, and it's like, all of this is coming at your face right now. Game over. Yeah, deck's cool. Lots of triggers to keep track of. It's both easy and hard to play. It's easy because, like, the best choice at any given time based on the cards in your hand is, like, usually pretty obvious, but then it's hard because you just have so much stuff to keep track of. And then doing the math to scrap out the last couple points of damage, especially if you're trying to end the game a turn early, can be challenging. But I do like this deck. And then I have one other deck that I was seriously considering, and that deck is Mono Blue Belcher. So the deck's pretty obvious. You play a bunch of the flip lands that are from, like, Zendikar and stuff, and then it's like, surprise, take 40, which is cool. The deck has a lot of resilience. because you get to play 0 mana interaction. Not only do you have Force Negation on their turns, but you have Flare of Denial plus little bodies that draw cards. And then you have Disrupting Shoal, which is usually like a 0 mana spell snare in this deck. Most of your cards to pitch cost 2 or 3. Hits a lot of stuff though. And then it's also like if they tap out, usually that's when you know you can kill them. And so you can generate a ton of mana in this deck by playing Whir of Invention. And your Whir will grab a Lotus Bloom, which so then like end of turn 3, Whir for Lotus Bloom. Now you have 7 on your next turn if you can play an untapped land, which seems a little tricky sometimes, but it's there. And the deck has kind of the card draw in it with the between Thundertrap Trainer and Pelagi Archaeologist. It's pretty good at that. But then the real powerhouse of the extra mana generation is the Tamashii. So Tamashii lets you bounce so you tap your Lotus Bloom for 3 white mana. Then you can bounce your 3 lands for like 9 mana. And so what happens is if you can have a Lotus Bloom come off suspend, or you were for a Lotus Bloom on their end step, your ability to win on turn 4 with counter magic backup to protect it is like nuts in this deck. And then you have counter spells too. So you can, this deck is both fast and hard to stop. But if you have like your Tamashii and your Lotus Bloom and you're picking up all your lands for this extra mana, you can actually make 14 mana on turn 4. Which is, if you picked up a Waterlogged Teachings, is enough to cast this, grab Whir of Invention for Belcher, and activate it all in the same turn. So the consistency is here. This deck is really strong. And unfortunately, I only picked up 3 Flare of Denial for this deck to play when I picked up Flares for Merfolk. And if I played this deck tonight, I wouldn't have a 4th Flare of Denial, and I think Flare of Denial is really good in this deck. So maybe this is like the best deck in the deck I should play, but I settled on playing Energy just because between that and sometimes the deck having, you really are only on one axis, and so like even a Pithing Needle on Charbelcher, like turn 1, when it's like the hardest for you to counter, can be really difficult. Or like Disrupting Flute on your turn when you can't force negation it, like after you tap out for a Thundertrap Trainer. And yeah, you do play 4 Sink into Stupor, so you can bounce problem permanents off the board. But between like the Bolt lands and all your lands either enter tapped or make you lose 3 life, which is a pretty steep cost when you're trying to like assemble this, what's effectively a 7 mana sorcery. It's sort of like a 4 mana sorcery and a 3 mana instant, because between the Whir and stuff, you put it together through 2 different turns. But yeah, this deck is good, but I have decided against it. All right, so now I'm going to go over Boros Energy, which is boring, but I'm going to glance through it really fast and point out the card choices that I'm playing that are a little atypical. All right, so here's Boros Energy. We've got our Guide of Souls. We're playing 4 of that. Pretty self-explanatory. It's a 1-drop that can get out of bolt range and add flying, which is good reach. We got the Ocelot Pride. This is the core where the deck goes crazy. Not only does it make extra casts when you gain life at the end of the turn, which sometimes with Guide of Souls is automatic. Then it starts making copy tokens, which can be Ragavan treasures, which can be a Johnny Cat tokens, which can be Kiki Jiki Goblin tokens, all on top of what you're already doing. Card's very impressive and pretty much always demands an answer. We're going with just 3 Ragavan. He is a legendary. He does have 1 toughness. He is very good, and he's honestly very good in this deck. And the other cards are just much more. You really want to play them on turn 1. That's when they're best. This guy has like the dash potential. He's a bit of a later game play as well. But 11 1-drops is a lot of 1-drops for any deck, really. But he is also a great addition. He also provides that extra treasure and the card draw and all the value there. And sometimes that treasure can be turn 2 Blood Moon or turn 2 Fable, can really get things rolling. Card's super good. We're just not playing 4 of it because it's a legend. Mostly because it's a legend. We are playing 4 of this legend because if he legend rules, he just flips into a planeswalker, which is kind of part of the plan. And most of his power comes from his 2/1 cat body anyway. When he flips, he can anthem your cats, which you rarely do. But he can also, you only need other red permanent for him to deal a ton of damage. And that ability can't be understated. It's like make a cat, and then it's like, oh, I have 6 creatures on the table. I will dome you from 12 to 6, and hopefully you figure something out by next turn, or you're dead. He's a very good card. Probably the core of the deck, and demands. Not only does he demand an answer, but when they try and kill him with spot removal, if you have your own efficient spot removal to kill other cat in response, then all of a sudden he flickers into a planeswalker. He's actually an incredibly difficult card to deal with too. As long as you're ahead. Obviously, if you're behind, then they're like attacking into him, and that's not ideal. Yeah, so Johnny, probably the real core of the deck, especially since you're off Amped Raptor and the energy aspect of the deck is not as key. Then we've got the big boy, Flage. I actually thought Flage was going to catch the ban and not Amped Raptor, because with Ring and Flage gone, you take the late game out of the deck. And the deck, even though the early game is nuts, you would lose a ton of steam. And I think it's harder for another card to come along and kind of take Flage's place. We're only playing 3 because this guy is actually clunky. Yeah, I mean, people really want to draw him, but drawing one of them every game is awesome, but drawing 2 of them really isn't that good. I mean, you can really only roll with 1 at a time, and 5 card, it's not like you get to escape over and over in this deck. You're not churning through cards that fast. So we decided to only play 3. Yeah, there's games because I'm playing less, I don't draw him. But this deck is also really capable of winning games without this guy. He's not required. So we're playing 1 less of that guy. Here's our spicy card. We're playing 1 Ranger Captain of Eos. I've been really impressed with this guy. I don't think I would play more than 1 though. He just kind of gives you a little bit more Ocelot pride in your deck. But between if you have energy or need energy for Static Prison, being able to grab the Guide of Souls or doubling up on the Ocelot prize is always really good if you already have one. But even being able to dash Ragavan in a game where that extra little bit of haste or that creature that's immune to sorcery speed removal is relevant. And then he has other kind of neat plays too, where like in some practice games we had, I was able to play him and then I could sack him on the upkeep and essentially counter some Lotus Blooms from going off suspend. He also serves as like a counter spell for Cascade, which nobody's doing. But there's other things too, like if he's on the table, your Storm player essentially has to kill him because they can't like line up the Past in Flames. And he can serve as a buy a turn versus Underworld Breach too, where they have to answer that. And so he's just a little bit of main deck disruption. And I think the Breach part of it is probably really relevant. And in some decks, it's like, you might just upkeep this with enough math on board, and now they can't Toxic Deluge or whatever, and you're gonna close the deal. And this sacrifice aspect, you could have this guy on the table, and then next turn you're like staring down counter magic, and you're like, I'll pop this and slam my Blood Moon, and they can't do anything about it. So he's been cool. He's in a lot of cases he's worse than Flage, but it's not like we're playing 3 of this and 1 Flage. We're playing 3 Flage, 1 of this. I do think it's good enough to play. We're playing 3 Fables, and yeah, the Ranger Captain could be like the 4th Fable. The red permanents are really relevant in this deck because they help Johnny do a ton of damage upstairs. This card does a lot of good stuff. But self-explanatory kind of. It was being played before the ring was being played. Now the ring's gone. Here it is. A little extra looting and card draw sets up Flage and stuff. And then flipping it, getting copies of Pride that make Pride token copies. Which is honestly win more, but it can do a lot of crazy stuff like that, which is pretty cool. Then next, we're kind of off our creatures at this point. We've got Goblin Bombardment. This deck goes really wide with tokens. Pre-ring ban, I was only playing 1 of this card to make room for other stuff. But I've decided to go up to the 2 copies that most people play most of the time. This card's really annoying for other people to play against, and really good in the mirror. And it can just kind of be that extra bit of damage. It's very similar to Nzu having like the Tribal Flames, where all of a sudden there's just like an extra 5 to your face. Goblin Bombardment kind of represents that, where every creature's dealing an extra damage on its way out, and you can send them on their way out a turn early. It's very good. And yeah, we're playing 2 of those because obviously the first one does the work and the second one's just to help you draw it, which is the same for Blood Moon. The big draw of this deck to me was main deck Blood Moon versus the Mardu version. They both have the early pressure, but I think Blood Moon's going to get the matches that are tougher. It's going to do a better job of that than playing Thoughtseize will. And in the mirror, game 1 anyway, because I don't think it's good enough to necessarily leave in, at least not both copies. It puts it into like a one-sided Flage situation where you can have Flage, but they can't. And you might just catch them unguarded and just really hurt their mana base. And like if you can play this and they didn't land the planes, like they're probably dead. And so for a number of reasons, I do think that Blood Moon kind of outweighs the Orcish Bowmaster aspect of the game that you would get from playing black. Even though I do really like the Energy Nightmare card. I think that card's pretty sweet. And I even like Obnixilis the Adversary. I just think the efficiency and the simplicity of just playing red-white and then having access to Blood Moon for some of those other matchups would be the card we'll play. Then we've got Static Prison. I'm not playing 4 Static Prison because sometimes we want to hit a creature anyway. I don't have to think as hard on Chain to the Rocks, like, oh, it's an Arboreal Grazer. Do I really want to waste a Static Prison on this where they're going to get it back? And the answer is usually yes. Like, remove a blocker, get your math in, even with the Static Prison, because if the game's going your way, you won't need more than 2 turns, really. So, these are just really good cards. But Chain to the Rocks in a deck that can draw the game out later is just better. This is mostly for Psychic Frog and like the Murktide matchup. There's some other matchups too, but for the most part, Static Prison's like equally good, except for when the game can go a little later, and that's usually the Psychic Frog matchup. Once you hit your board games, usually your sorcery speed, and then your stuff like this can get blown out by a disenchant. They're like less choice, but game one being the catch-alls that they are pretty good. And then we got our instant speed removal. We're playing 4-bolt. We're an aggro deck. It's the best. Red fatal push. Can also hit the face, which is really good. Feels like most decks are at about 6 spot removals. We're playing 7. It just feels like that's the kind of format we're in right now, where you got to hit these little guys. This one obviously can bank energy, and if you have Guide of Souls, it can hit really big things. But the consistency of having lots of energy laying around just isn't really there anymore. And anyway, that's our 7 bolts. We're also playing a main deck Thraben Charm. The Exiling Graveyard's kind of whatever. It's really about 4 damage to a creature. You almost always have at least 2 guys on the board, and sometimes it's even bigger than that. But it also destroys Urza's Saga, which I think is really relevant. And it can also snipe an Underworld Breach, which doesn't always work because your cards gain escape or whatever. But and then that brings us to our mana base. Playing 22 lands. We've got 2 Arena of Glory. This is for Flage. Hasty Flage out of the graveyard does 12 damage. Similar to how there's a bunch of combo decks that kill you if you tap out, this can also represent a kill you if you tap out situation. Kind of surprising that Flage is still legal, considering he can do this. So it's probably a mistake not to play it. So we're playing Flage today. Then we're playing a card that's actually gotten a lot worse, and I might trim one. It's Aether Hub. It's, sort of mana fixing, but it's mostly a colorless land that's just providing that free energy, which can be cool to just up discharge for a turn or whatever, or get a surprise, flying creature a little bit earlier, but not super special. And we got our basic lands, the plains for Blood Moon, the mountain for the Merfolk that's like a Magus of the Moon, so that we can bolt that down. And if you know your matchup, you know when you need to fetch for that. Paying the life's pretty penalty free, so we got 4 Sacred Foundry. That's a pretty no-brainer. We're playing 2 of the Surveil land. It's surprising, but not that surprising how often you get windows to grab these, even in a fast deck. And they're also great Boseiju grabs. Then we're on to the fetch lands. We're playing 4 Arid Mesa. This is the one that can hit high of the type, so it's the one that matters the most. And then we've got 5 other fetch lands that say plains. Doesn't really matter which ones you use, but I do think you want to be a 9 fetch land deck. Between filling the yard for Flage, thinning the deck, having that opening plains for the Blood Moon scenario, you want to play all those basics. And that rounds out our main deck, which leaves us with the sideboard. We've got an Orum's Chant. We're only playing 1 because Storm's less prevalent, but you can also bring this in to force something through counter magic in like a Murktide matchup, and you can also play it when Primeval Titan grabs a pair of Lotus Fields before they float all that mana or whatever. They're ultimately going to have to sacrifice all their lands, so you just Orum's Chant them before they can put an Aftermath Analyst effect on the stack. It's been really nice blowout potential there. Also for Storm and Amulet Titan, and to a lesser, I would put it in versus a True Tron, but not most of the Trons that run around these days. We've got Damping Sphere. It's good against Storm concepts. It's the same with like Breach combo. It's just something they have to deal with before they can continue, which in theory buys you time to close the game. Just playing a couple of those. Next is the Graveyard Hate Suite. We've got a handful of different cards. We got a Ghost Vacuum. I do own more than one, but I'm choosing just to play one because I like having cards with different names to kind of get around Pithing Needle effects, but also eating 2 cards at a time can be very good. And the other half of the card, getting 6 mana versus potentially having a really big vehicle, the hearse actually has more playability too. The vacuum's just a turn faster and a mana cheaper. Then we've got a Surgical Extraction. Also a piece of Graveyard Hate. This one, they don't necessarily see coming. They can gear up for less. You know, are they going to board in Thoughtseize cards? Are they going to board in Artifact Answers? So a lot of times, hitting their graveyard from a bunch of different angles is the right way to play it. This one's obviously better if they're like trying to persist an Archon. You know, you can save yourself from a big headache there, and then also like the Glorious Vengeance style matchups, stuff like that can be good there. Pulling all the ballistas out of a deck can be really good sometimes. And just the speed and the way it interacts, a lot of times it catches people off guard. So we're playing that. Then we've got a Containment Priest. It's really good against like the Gorios, Persist, Creativity type stuff. But this card also counters Green Sun Zenith, which is a freshly unbanned card. And so this seems like it has a lot of playability. And even when we play Flays from our graveyard, we're casting it. So we're never punished here. And so I think Containment Priest, super solid sideboard card for graveyard applications. Then we've got a Thraben Charm, second copy. This one also doubles as a way to kill Saga. So we like that aspect of it too. Just a very versatile card. And then for our other Artifact Answers, we're playing a Wear Tear. As cool as Meltdown is, a lot of times being able to like hit an artifact and a Saga, because pretty much all these artifact decks are guaranteed to have Saga in the deck too. And just like the first turn Stone Rain on Saga is a lot of times more of a game-winning play than, you know, getting behind and then being like, look at this Meltdown once I've gotten behind. We are playing one copy of Meltdown. Just sort of that bailout, you know, if you're staring down a mountain of constructs, or the really fast Mox Opal play. In most sideboards, I think Brotherhood Zin's actually better because it has the versatility. But here in this matchup, it can be a little bit cheaper to play, which is relevant. And then it's also for 1 or less. A lot of you can play it for 1 or less sometimes, which can be really relevant. So like versus like Amulet or whatever. So it's mostly just the cheaper aspect of it there. And we have a Stony Silence. Turns off Grinding Station. Turns off any sort of Mana Rock. Turns off Walking Ballista. Turns off the equipment for Brood Scale combo. Turns off Agatha's Soul Cauldron. And then it also hits the mana abilities too. Turns off Darksteel Citadel and Mox Opal. So really powerful card. Considered playing 2, but they don't double up that well. And we've got quite a bit of Artifact Answers. So, and maybe I will go up to 2 because I got a couple artifacts, or I got a couple sideboard slots that I'm not that big on. Then for the mirror match, playing a couple Arc Trail. Everybody seems to have forgotten about this card. Some people put like Pyroclasm for like the mirror match situation. You almost always have a 2 toughness creature and a 1 toughness creature out there at the same time. And rather than kind of getting behind and then using Pyroclasm to equalize, you can be putting your stuff on the board while they're putting their stuff on the board, and then you play this sweet 2-for-1 removal spell. I think it's pretty good. It also has that kill a creature and, you know, a little bit to the face, which can matter more than you think. And then for the 2 random flex slots, playing a Path to Exile, mostly a Psychic Frog spot removal card, but it also doesn't care about toughness, so it's good at spiking Deceiver Exarchs, if that becomes a thing. And then just having that instant speed playability can be pretty good. Also, like taking a Primeval Titan off the table before they clone it. Just a lot of times your sorcery speed removal, like your static prisons, are worth taking out if there's any sort of combo aspect involved in their deck, because you need the instant speed to interact with them, and so this is the good spot removal for that. And then our last sideboard card is a Disruptor Flute, which cool part about this one being instant speed is you can kind of see what they're winding up to and then just play this to name that. So if it's like Green Sun for 3 in Yawgmoth, you can just in response name Grist instead of naming Yawgmoth, if that's going to be all you need to close the game out. And then it can also make the name cost 3 more to cast, so playing this on creativity for, to make it cost too much if you have their graveyard under control, or playing, if you get to a situation and it's like they're only out here is All Is Dust, I'll just make All Is Dust cost 10. And so I kind of like it. Really untested though. The cards I cut out for Path and some of my some of my other sideboard stuff is Obsidian Charmaw, but most of the time Charmaw isn't really getting you out of a Tron problem. It's just more same. So like I was thinking about Charmaw, and I was thinking about Magus, and I was even thinking about Pyromancer, but in reality I think the sideboard cards I have are going to be more relevant for more matchups. Anyway, that's my take on Modern. I'm kind of running out of time here. Go back to doing some other things. I got a lot of cards to sort, stuff to do. And let me know what you guys are playing in this new Modern format, if you play Modern. And thanks for watching, especially if you made it all the way to the end.